We are so excited to share this conversation we had today with a woman who I think wears as many hats as any person I've ever seen. She has a large family. She's been in every industrial category. She is now turning her attention to an approach as it relates to sexual and reproductive health that she describes as bringing a reverence and a sense of acceptance and beauty to one's sexuality, which is just a really interesting perspective when you think that this same person was in boardrooms talking about business-to-business software and the steel industry.
Well, she certainly switches gears from author to boardroom person to product designer, and she fills multiple roles. So it's very exciting to hear about her journey.
And one of the things that is always amazing to me, what I love, and always gets me going in this space is how people come into this space. I don't necessarily think they say, I'm going to make a product for sexual health or enjoyment or arousal or menopause or fill in the blank, but they look around and say, there's not anything that speaks to me, so I'm going to create it myself. And in Christine's case, she interviewed 3,000 women before she started truly formulating and manufacturing her products.
Well, I also love the way she speaks about the organic nature of her products, non-fragrant, and she's got the science to back why she picks the ingredients that she does and takes a lot of lessons from different cultures and history. So a lot to hear about from her.
Yeah, I found that particularly fascinating. Women and people who identify as women and people who give birth and people who menstruate have been dealing with these things for so many years. They must have been doing something before modern times. And so going back and looking at different cultures and different approaches and integrating those with what we traditionally refer to as Western medicine is really interesting. I will say, every day we do this, I learn something.
100% agree. The other thing that always shocks me is how many different communities of women really find themselves trending towards, one product line, one other group of community women who are all dealing with the same problem from a different viewpoint.
Today's episode is sponsored by Kindra, a radical self-care company that makes estrogen-free essentials designed by women, for women, and thoughtfully designed to target and relieve the symptoms of the menopausal journey.
Welcome to the Business of the V. Hello, friends and colleagues. I'm Dr. Alyssa Dweck.
And I'm Rachel Braun-Sherrill. Each week, we bring you the most fascinating investors, inventors, entrepreneurs, academics, and healthcare practitioners who are making things happen in women's sexual and reproductive health.
If you are a woman, know a woman, have a business, or care about your V health and wellness, fasten your seatbelts and listen in to another informative and inspiring episode.
We are so excited to have today's guest, Christine Marie Mason, who's the founder and CEO of Rosebud Woman, which is an intimate body care line that addresses the unmet needs of women and focuses on something that we love, which is inviting new conversations about the totality of women's sexual and reproductive health. Welcome, Christine.
Thank you very much for having me. I love that you have an entire podcast devoted to this subject.
As do we. So tell us, how do you go from business to business software to self-care, self-love, and other important things?
Well, like all things that women do, it's not really linear, is it? They were sort of happening in parallel. While I was doing software, I was also raising a family and exploring what it meant to be in a female body in the world, and learning about yoga and tantra and meditation and trauma healing, and sort of how all of those things sit very in an interesting way commingled in female embodiment. That the idea that you work in the world and you raise a family and you also live in this cauldron of historical bias against sexuality and things like that was pretty evident. So I thought I was going to retire and I retired for about 1.5 years, and I could not get this idea out of my head to go ahead and start another business that brought all of those things together. So that's how.
And was there a specific moment? You're obviously in business, you have a large family, you were playing, as so many of us do, multiple roles at the same time. Was there a moment where you said, I have to make this my passion? Or was there an experience that you had that said, I should be spending my time doing something else, and this is the thing I should be spending time doing?
I started to make product in my kitchen, like so many beauty entrepreneurs do. Like I wanted to get some plant-based lubes and moisturizers for myself. And I really didn't think it was going to be a thing until I started giving it away to friends. And this was while I was still doing my other businesses and running a TEDx and doing a lot of other stuff. And there was something in the way people responded to the quality of that, and how just giving them these products opened up a conversation around sensuality and sexuality that really planted the seed. And then a little bit later on, I was doing some therapeutic work with myself, and I thought back on my life and realized that almost every challenge I had in the world was related to sexuality and how to handle it and how to live in it, and being in a female body and dealing with that bias. And I just, something just clicked, and I decided to pursue it. And then before like investing my life savings in building this business, I went and did a real survey. I surveyed 3,000 women on their needs. And after seeing the responses to that basically 70% of all the women that we surveyed had one or more of these common needs, that's when I decided to turn it into a real product company. I wasn't really sure the direction it was going to go. And then when I started making it, it was magic. Everything started clicking together. I don't want to do a big run on here. So do you want to hear that story?
I would like to hear about how you've chosen your ingredients, how you've chosen the types of products you're, marketing. But I want Rachel to finish her thought, which is fascinating to hear.
So you said so many things. First of all, what I love about working with and meeting entrepreneurs in the space is that you said something so casual, which sort of separates the entrepreneurs in this space from any I've ever seen. You said, well, I wanted to understand the needs, so I interviewed 3,000 people. That is pretty astounding, because lots of people get to the point where they say they have a good idea and they speak to 10 people or 100. It is rare, in my experience, that someone speaks to 3,000 people before they start a business.
That's where you can point to the software piece. That's where you can point to having 15 years of prior experience in starting businesses. I mean, I started 6 other companies and sold a bunch of them to big public companies. So, the idea that I love my ideas. I fall in love with my own ideas every day, but just because I have an idea doesn't mean I'm representative of, a big market. And so I better find out, I better validate by asking questions. And so that was, that does come from training, I think. And also there is another piece in this industry in particular. Like I've raised venture money for my other companies, but in 2017, like in 2016, when I was thinking about starting this, the idea of going in front of a room of, I know you're involved with Springboard. I did a Springboard Boston 10, 15 years ago or something. But, I couldn't walk into a room full of male VCs and say, I'm going to do pussy-ceuticals. This is like my thing now. And so I knew that I was going to fund it myself, at least to get it off the ground. So I better know what I was talking about.
I love that. I've never heard that. I've never heard that word before. I myself am a vagipreneur, so I appreciate
that.
Clever names. So you have referred to, and I don't want to push if it's not comfortable, but you had made a couple of big comments that caught my attention, that when you looked at your life and you thought about what it was like living and working in your body, it sounded so important and big and deep. Is there any particular experience or thought you had or set of experiences that went from, I have this feeling, I have this idea, to 3,000 people?
Because you've been in it so long, I don't know if you can remember back to sort of like, just even think back to when you were 13 or 14 or coming of age and having your first sexual responses, and like having a big libido And growing up quasi-Catholic, in my case, like knowing that there was something desperately wrong with you for wanting to have sexual connection at that level of intimacy. And then I've mentioned this in other interviews, but I lost my mother. She was murdered when I was 11 in a violent crime against women. Like she was a random crime for being a woman. And so I know that I'm carrying some of that. And then I'm also kind of right. And so I would get into these situations where I would find myself as the only woman in a room of men over and over and over. And like learn that if I just smushed my boobs down and like took on a very linear analytical framework, that I could make it, but that there was no room to have the expression of the fullness of my cyclicality. And there was just no room to be sensual, sexual, female in the way that I wanted to be in those spaces. And as I got older, I think with menopause and with aging, and also having daughters who were coming of age, that like I started to question why that was. Why is the work world not designed to allow for all of these different parts of my life? And why did I carry so much denial of the feminine in my body?
I'm going to bring this around to my practice. I see a lot of patients for their sexual health concerns. Probably the most difficult, complex, but also potentially rewarding consultation that I will take on involves low libido. Because for women, it's complicated. For guys, they just kind of have to get it up, down, done. And it's all about blood flow for the most part. For the most part, I don't want to simplify it too much. But for women, there's the whole biosocial, psychosocial element. And you bring up something that strikes a chord because of your upbringing and the religious background and the values that must have been imparted on you at that time, that has an awful lot to do with libido. And I see this a lot in practice, and oftentimes have to really rely on my mental health colleagues to help people tease through those early memories and early teachings. With that said, I am wondering, what kind of questions did you ask 3,000 people? I assume they were mostly women. Or all women?
It was all women. I mean, women X, there's some transgender people in there. But I asked primarily about physical needs. I did not ask them about their sexual trauma or their sexual bias. That came later. The questions were, do you have, what are your common concerns? And I prompted some of them, and they turned out to be, mostly moisture. And it was not only menopause dependent. It was women who were on medication. It was women who'd had trauma. We did tease some of that out. Like if you'd had an experience where you were trying to shut down your sexuality, that it was hard to lubricate, period, later. It gets like a psychosomatic or a mind-body connection of shutting that down. Irritation, itching, arousal, like lack of sensation was a complaint that a lot of women had. And that wasn't tied so much to age as it was to whether or not you'd had a vaginal birth, or also whether you'd had trauma. Anyway, so out of that survey, we picked there was another one on cleanliness and a concern with odor, which I took really with a grain of salt because of the experience of like not wanting to shame people for the natural scent of the biome or like buy into that, but to also provide non-irritating cleansers. I really want to hone the message in that there's like nothing wrong with your natural scent. If you're conditioned to think of that scent as wrong, then you might want to fix something that's not actually a problem. Anyway, so those were the first 4 products. They came out of the research, and I made on launch one product for each of those concerns. And then to answer your early question on ingredients, before going into the chemist who helped me solidify a commercial formula, I met with Ayurvedic physicians, Chinese medicine practitioners, South American shamans, what's like North American witches, like white witches, who know the herbal properties. Like it's not like women just have begun to have these problems now. They've had similar concerns for thousands of years. So that knowledge had to exist, which in fact it did. And then I took that to my chemist, and we formulated with a lot of those researched ingredients, and then added some new ones and subtracted some others that really didn't do anything, or where I couldn't get the molecular size right to really impact enough transdermally. And that process in and of itself, saying I want plant-based, organic, things that actually work and have studies against them. That was a really fun process and also very, very carefully done.
Today's episode is sponsored by Kindra. At Business of the V, we focus on the most important issues facing women in their sexual and reproductive health. At the top of that list is menopause. So this episode of Business of the V is sponsored by Kindra, a modern health and wellness company that offers estrogen-free essentials to relieve the most disruptive signs of menopause, including vaginal dryness, hot flashes, disrupted sleep, and more. The line of essentials is focused on the peri to postmenopausal journey and includes a daily vaginal lotion, as well as a range of supplements for sleep enhancement, focus boosting, and daily wellness. To try these natural solutions to menopause, use promo code BOVPodcast at checkout for 20% off your first order or subscription.
What is your feeling on fragrance, and how do you scent, if you scent at all, any of your products, especially based on this, very apropos discussion about the normal vaginal scent?
Yeah, we do not do like chocolate vanilla cream sickles flavors. I've seen that out there. That, it's just, I don't put any added scent. They have a scent, but it comes from some of the actives.
Natural products.
So like there's bisabolol in Honor Balm, and it's got a chamomile scent. So it's got a little bit of, it's chamomile. So it's got a little bit of that. But no, I don't. I mean, my body oil, I have an all over massage oil, and that's has a little bit of a stronger scent. But again, it's just from the actives. Yeah. Fragrance also, I don't know if you saw this, a safer beauty package that was just introduced at the end of July, where they're saying like fragrance is the loophole in all cosmetic packaging, cosmetic production, where you can put anything into the fragrance category and you don't have to disclose what it is. So fragrance hides so many toxic ingredients, and so you won't see that on our label. We have total transparency on the ingredients.
Wonderful. Yes, I notice that in practice, that my patients are really looking for things that do not have added fragrance. They tend to disrupt the biome in general. And I also think it sends a difficult message that you're trying to mask something. If there's an infection and you have an odor, then we'll take care of that. But if there is just a natural scent, that's not something that necessarily needs to be masked.
And that the natural scent is actually like something you can learn to read. Like when you're which I interviewed a woman, Angie Davis. She talks about reading your period and how to read the color of the blood and how to read discharge.
We speak about that commonly in gynecology because the period is truly a window into general health. So I think that's very appropriate.
I'm trying really hard to tie super effective and beautiful products that look like beautiful objects of desire that you want to keep out on your nightstand with a message that your nature, that your sensual and sexual and reproductive life is totally healthy and whole and gorgeous and worthy of reverence, and that you're worthy of reverence. And then also to help people point out where these cultural stories are still alive in their bodies. And that's been a huge part of our positioning and the mission.
So where is the company today? The story is amazing. I'm sitting here thinking, how is the person that I'm seeing and the energy that you have and the sort of the soulfulness that you have, trying to picture you in a boardroom using that voice that you just showed us before. But where are you in terms of the development of the company? Obviously, you're commercially available. Where are you focused? What's going on? Where have you been in terms of the need to raise funding?
We're coming up on our third anniversary. Our first product sale was in October of 2018, and we were primarily D2C focused for the first 18 months. We did about $700,000 in sales in our first year, and then a couple million in our second year, and we're doubling against this year. And now we're in Saks and Nordstrom, and we're in 70 plus spas and OBGYN offices and wellness sites online. And it's really going well. And that was all self-funded with the exception of a couple $100,000 from some friends and family. And what I was really excited about in terms of the financing of the company was discovering these new plug-in debt financing instruments like Clearbank and Shopify Capital, where they introspect your sales online And they are also tied into your social media acquisition metrics, and they can see how much it costs you to acquire a customer and how much you're spending and how often the customer comes back. And then they extend you dynamically credit offers, $50,000, $250,000, depending on what they're seeing, that have a flat fee that you pay it back out of daily sales. It's the lowest cost of capital in 30 years in business. And it was a really instrumental part of us growing because we were able to finance inventory and other things like that. You know, from the clients you have, that MOQs, minimum order quantities, are often 10,000 units, which is not a small feat when you're making things in glass and sustainable ingredients and all of that stuff. And so those two methods were great. I put a presentation together this summer to begin a formal round of capital because I'm seeing competition heat up, people who are backed by Procter and Gamble and who have a little bit more of a corporate approach, and I don't want to be left behind. So we will raise capital in the fall, but so far it's just us.
That's amazing. And it's really, I'm sure, fascinating to people who are listening who haven't had experience with that kind of financing. What's additionally exciting about it is it doesn't affect your cap table, it sounds like. So you get low cost money and still retain the ownership of the company, which is a really exciting option for people to think about. We're not dispensing financial advice or medical advice, but we're always happy to share new ways of solving problems and doing things.
Yeah, like I would say it's not just low cost capital, because you can do debt financing through the bank. Okay. But, just basically I bank with a really great bank in California. And they said without 2 years of operating history, they couldn't even consider us for financing. And, of course, that's out of the ballpark for startups. And then any other traditional lender, they want you on a formal payback schedule, which is also like, oh, that creates a whole bunch of risk. What if we have a down month? And so these new models, it's just super interesting. They use AI, they use algorithms, they do predictive modeling, and then they're your partner. And when they extend you an offer and you say yes, the money's in the bank the next day. It's like, it's so controllable.
How did you find them as an option?
I went to Founder Made in New York and they were presenting. It's like a little, a founder focused consumer product show.
So for people who think networking is a fool's errand, here's an example of where it's not. And certainly in my experience, especially in this community of people thinking about sexual and reproductive health, there are lots of collaborations and partnerships to be made that, in my experience, either shorten the timeline to get where you're going, help you avoid the same mistakes somebody else made, or maybe make them more quickly and get to the next stage with a few less bruises and scabs.
And in this community, can I just say, like, I worked in the steel mill industry before and heavy equipment and software, how amazing is it to hang around with a bunch of people who are interested in women's health and wellness and beauty and skincare and optimizing your experience in a body? Like, it's a beautiful community of people to connect with.
I want to change gears for just one moment because I note that you've written several books. Which was your first? Which is your favorite? And what prompted you to go into the book industry?
I think I was always wanting to be a writer, and I wrote a lot professionally before, as part of board roles and things like that. But this question of, who are we? What is our identity? Why are we separate from one another? How did I get the idea that I was alone? Those were kinds of questions that I was interested in. And so the first book was called Indivisible, and it was about coming back to connection in a world that really wants you to live as an isolated meat body in a lot of ways and puts a lot of pressure on you. And I investigated, a lot of social, cultural biases against connection, and that was great. That book, the second book, was a book on activism, like people who saw 30 years in the future that there was a social justice issue that was wrong. And I looked at 8 great social justice movements through history: gender rights, children's rights, racial justice, those kinds of things, and found people who were 30 years ahead of the timeline, and looked at their inner lives. Like, what was it about them that could hold the truth of a world that was yet to come while being confronted with a lot of resistance? And then what was common in the people they surrounded themselves with? And that was so exciting because if you have a vision for what can be created and you can hold the vision and pull like 5 or 7 people around you, it works. It has like a contagion to it. And then I started writing around women's embodiment. I wrote the invitation, which is one of the things we put out with Rosebud. It's a diagram of your parts and a really basic primer on that, and also an invitation to question these social ideas that I mentioned earlier. A body love journal. I wrote a book on self-healing, like that we focus so much on collective trauma, but there's also collective joy, and that it's in the celebration, that a lot of our medicine is in celebration. And I'm doing one on reverence. And the big one, which is tied to the company, is looking at women's sensual, sexual, and reproductive lives from birth to 100, and especially looking at the second half of life, which basically people say menopause and treat it as a bucket that goes from 52 to 100. And like it's got just as many phases as pubescence to menopause. And so I'm really excited about that when I'm doing that one with Rachel Lehman Haupt, who wrote The Female Brain with, and so that's been a really, I mean, it's a way for me to like look more deeply at questions and then package them up. But yeah, I'm a little bit of a nerd. I like science and I like studying, and I don't know that anybody reads that stuff, Alyssa. I'm hoping they do.
I think people dabble for sure. I know that I'm often recommending at least some sort of mindfulness exercise on a regular basis for patients who are navigating menopause and having difficulties with it, and the stress that's come with it over the past year and a half for sure.
I was talking to a really amazing woman yesterday about the movement towards integrality, and that we're moving into a place where you asked me earlier about like, what was it like to go in a boardroom and use this tone of voice? I want to say that that's all changing. Mindfulness and embodiment and analytical mind, all that stuff can live together. My spiritual life can live inside of my marketing job. They don't have to be separated.
We heard you talk science, and now it's a little bit more soulful. And then we know you go to boardrooms, so you've got it all covered.
I feel that way for most people, that's what I'm encountering, is that people are bringing their whole selves into their lives. I think COVID had a big impact on that.
Yeah.
You know, me seeing people at home with their cats and their babies in the background and understanding their full life is a very different thing than coming into the office like all packaged up.
Yeah.
And I think it's been a really humanizing period.
That's such an interesting way to put it. When you said at the beginning, when you went into a boardroom and you had to sort of literally, theoretically and literally flatten yourself. We've spoken to other folks in the space who say the world wants my voice to be small.
Yep.
But my voice and my person are big. I have a lot to say. I have a lot to share. And even if society is putting me in a box, I'm not going to allow that to happen to me. So I just think the analogies and the visuals around flattening yourself, which is particularly meaningful for people who identify as women, and this idea that don't make me small, are so critical, not just to your expression of sexuality, but to your expression of your personhood.
I agree with that. I think it's really changing with like my daughter's generation. You know, they're very much about being fully themselves, and I'm so excited to see it. I guess I'm in my mid 50s. My daughters are 33, 25. You know, they're 20s and 30s. My son's also in that range, and they're having children of their own now. And I find that the depth that they hold themselves as sort of valuable and are willing to make a big noise, them and their friends, and to claim their space in the world is night and day.
So what's coming down the pipe for Rosebud, other than all these fascinating products?
More products. I've got more products. I did put out the next wave. We put out a body oil. We put out some other things like that, but I've got a really cool upper canal lubricant that's coming out. And I've got another topical product that's a euphoric that does not have CBD or THC in it, but is a relaxant. A huge portion of women in our community say that the number one reason that they can't get aroused is they can't relax. So we're really working on some of that. And the podcast is going pretty well. I'm liking that. And then a couple more books. As a founder, one of the biggest challenges, and that's not just in this business, but other businesses, is to hold your vision and not be reactive to everybody that's coming into the space. And there are so many companies that have launched in the last couple of years since we launched, and they each take a very unique voice. Like I was saying, there's like the sassy one and the androgynous one. And I'm just going to focus on everything you need for menopause, from lip care to eyelash care and vitamins. Like there's just so many different ways to configure your voice and how to stay with the voice that you actually own, which for me is you're perfect, you're whole, you're complete, your sexuality and sensuality is worthy, you're worthy of reverence. If you're going to do something to take care of yourself here, make it pure and make it beautiful. And that there's nothing to be ashamed of in asking for assistance. In fact, joy and pleasure are your birthright. And that's going to be my positioning from the now until the day I die. Joy and pleasure are your birthright. That's my number one message.
Well, I can't think of a better way to end than with the expression of your positioning and what you stand for. And as a person who grew up in marketing, there's nothing more exciting than being in an emotionally engaging category and figuring out how to speak to your target, defining them, relating to them, motivating them, inspiring them to engage with your brand. So thank you so much. It was a pleasure to get to speak to you in this context. Thanks so much for joining. And
thank you.
We really wish you continued success.
Great to meet you.
Don't forget, subscribe to our podcast at businessofthev.com for the latest trends and trendsetters in women's health and business.